It's the technology outlook in the energy industry. A very distinguished panel here with many different disciplines. But I have the pleasure to introduce the moderator of the panel, a very close friend of mine, a longtime colleague at Schlumberger, and if there's one person in my career that I can say who has the right to say been there, done that, that's Sanjay Sood. Sanjay has...
in all of the words, this is called Jack of all trades.
Sanjay was a long-term Schlumberger employee, started with being a field engineer, has done so many countries, so many different businesses. But currently, Sanjay Sood is the Vice President for Africa, Middle East, Asia, and Australia, which is a big region, for Transocean. In this role, he's responsible for companies' operations in the Eastern Hemisphere, with operations in 20 countries, and with a 4 billion revenue. So by all means, a very big job. Sanjay has done a lot of different things in the technology side, as well as sort of general management, personnel. So he really knows all aspects of the upstream oil and gas industry. So, Sanjay.
Thank you, Sunil. It's an honor. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I hope the others have started, so I presume the noise is not going to cross over. There's a little bit of interference. It's an honor and a delight to be here for this session on technology outlook in the energy industry. We have a wonderful panel, and I'm just going to make a few remarks to begin. 5 years ago, how many of you in the energy industry, by the way? So quite a few. Okay, so I don't have to explain the energy industry. But 5 years ago, if we had this conference, we would have spoken about peak oil. That's all we would have talked about. US production 5 years ago was 5 million barrels. Today, US is producing 8 million barrels of oil. 8 million barrels. Very soon, US will be the largest producer of crude oil. How many of you knew that, by the way? So people do know that. Now, secondly, in terms of technology, okay, 5 years ago when we were talking about Houston, everybody said it's shifting. Houston will no longer be the oil and gas hub of the universe. Guess what? We are back in Houston. We are back in energy. We are back talking about it. And it's not only in conventional energy. It's also in non-conventionals. Texas, I was just reading it this morning. Texas is the highest growth area in renewable energy. So the renewable energy growth rate in Texas is higher than any other source of energy. And it's all based on one thing, technology. So I have an exciting panel today, and I'm delighted to be part of this panel. And I'm going to introduce you to the first speaker, who's Elisabeth Torsad. Elisabeth is the Executive Vice President of DNV and the Group Chief Technology Officer. She's come all the way from Norway, so please welcome her.
Thank you very much. And thank you very much for inviting me to this panel. It's a pleasure to be here to talk about technology outlook for the energy future. That's a huge topic, and we're supposed to cover it in 7 minutes each, and I guess I could have spoken for hours. First, a few words about the company I represent, and then I will talk briefly about how technology outlook, working with outlook and with innovation, what that means for a company, and I will touch upon some of the core areas that we think are game changers for the energy industry in the years to come. DNVGL is a consulting and ship classification company. We're present in more than 100 countries around the world with a total of 16,500 employees. Next year, we're celebrating 150 years, and we have a business model and a view on our industry and our innovation that's a long-term perspective. We focus on sustainability for ourselves, for a company, and for the industries that we work in. Our core industries are the oil and gas industry, the electricity energy industry, including renewable energy and including transmission of electricity, maritime industry, healthcare, and food and beverage. So we work across industries and we look at technologies and innovations across industries. Every year we invest 5% of our own revenue in technology foresight, in technology development and innovation. As a knowledge-based company, we do not make those investments into IP rights. Quite contrary, we share what we find and the results of our innovations with the industry. We make those investments in order to develop our own knowledge and in order to serve our customers better. And we invest in our own time. So 5% of our time is time we spend on our own innovation instead of working profitably for customers. And we do that because it has proven to be important for us over time. Those investments have proven to give us the ability to grow, the ability to attract and retain talent across the industries, and to take new market positions. We think looking into the future is core for long-term sustainability of any business. We work on technology outlook, developing scenarios. And in the current strategy plan and our long-term view on the future, we've developed 4 different scenarios. Those scenarios depend on the economical development of the world, they depend on the regulatory development, and in particular in how we work globally with climate change. And that's closely related, as we know, to our energy future. And then we assess a large number of technologies, and we assess the importance of those technologies in the different scenarios. Some technologies are important if the world develops in one direction, while other technologies has the ability to be game-changing technologies independent of which scenario the world will develop into. So I'll touch upon some of those game-changing technologies that will be important for our energy future, regardless of scenarios. First and foremost, in the next couple of decades, we think that data will play a much more important role across the energy industry. Actually, when we look at the last few decades, the use of IT has, of course, changed our private lives. So we can say it's changed business with emails and with lots of automation. But it has actually not substantially changed the way we work with energy production. Looking at the power plant, looking at offshore production today, there is a lot of the same amount of human interaction as it has been over the last few decades. Over the next couple of decades, we will have much more real-time monitoring, we'll have much more direct processing of data, and we will have automated decisions without human interaction. That will enable us to use smart grid technology for power distribution. It will enable us to increase our efficiency of energy production, whether it's renewable energy, offshore oil and gas, and conventional oil and gas. Across the energy value chain, from production through distribution and through consumption, the use of data will significantly change our future. Related to that, but slightly different, is large-scale electricity storage. That will also enable renewable energy production to play a much more important role of our electricity life. The third large topic is within drilling technologies. We think that over the next few decades, drilling technologies has the ability to reduce offshore drilling times with as much as 50%, implementing a range of different technologies to achieve that. And of course, thus reducing the cost of offshore drilling and production. Another extremely exciting area for drilling technologies is related to geothermal energy. Again, it might take us a couple of decades. We think we will have the ability to drill down to 9 kilometers depth, enabling us to access geothermal energy on a global basis. That will change our energy future significantly. Fourth area I'll touch upon is water treatment. In the relatively near term, we will have mobile water treatment that will be usable for fracking, for unconventional production. We think that there is a potential of reducing the water consumption that has to be trucked into fracking sites today and production sites today with as much as 40% in just a few years' time. But efficient water treatment will both reduce the need for energy and will enhance the efficiency of energy production through a series of energy sources. All of those are technology areas where we invest into our time today, where we're working with our customers, working with universities, and attracting some of the talents of the industries to support us in that. And we hope to work with many of you in the future years to come. Thank you.
Thank you, Elisabeth. That was a good one to start a wide range of technologies that they cover. Now we're going to go for something completely different. Sanjiv Ratan is the Group Deputy Vice President of Hydrogen Product Technology for Technip, Stone, and Webster. He's a Bachelor of Technology from Chemical Engineering from IIT Delhi. That's nice to know because I'm from the same institute, but I have a little bit more gray hair than he does. And he has more than 34 years of experience. So without further ado, let me present Sanjiv Ratan, who's going to talk about hydrogen-related technologies.
Thank you, Sanjay, for the nice introduction. Hello, everyone here. Feels great to be part of this fraternity, great esteemed audience. I would just like to give a different little dimension to this session in terms of hydrogen, but before I go there, let me give you a little background of what Technip, Stone, and Webster is. Technip, of course, is a world-class EPC and technology company worldwide with three major sections of business. We are pretty prominent in deep seawater pipelay, and then we have offshore structures, and then we have onshore. And we belong to the onshore part of the company. Last year, we acquired Stone and Webster, and there it made a very big impact on the way we want to project ourselves. So we created a global business unit on onshore technologies, combining the technologies of Technip in terms of hydrogen and ethylene with those from Stone and Webster in terms of FCC, GTL, and a vast majority of GTL technologies in terms of Fischer-Tropsch. And of course, there was a major synergy on the ethylene cracking technology of Stone and Webster and Technip. So we have all combined together into one global business unit for the downstream technologies and headquartered in Houston with 5 major offices in Holland, California, from where I come, and Boston. So, and Boston also has the old Badger spectrum and the portfolio of technologies in terms of petrochemicals and polymers. So with that background, I would like to give you a little insight into the role of hydrogen in the carbon-constrained future global energy landscape. As we all sit here, and I saw all the hands raised in terms of the people who know more about energy than what I can say, but the global energy landscape, we are faced with 3 perennial elements which are called the 3 E's syndrome, which is a combination or finding your place in the puzzle between energy efficiency, environment, and economics. So when you try to build your future landscape around these 3 major pillars of future generations and future nodes of requirements, you will have affordability between energy efficiency and economics. You will have clean transport fuels and energy sources between efficiency and environment. And the last but the most important part will be the sustainability between economics and environment, which will define how sustainable is the pathway to that energy source. So these 3 E's drive most of the technological advances and the deployment viability in terms of the energy landscape. And I think that's what we all share when we talk about future energy. When we talk about global energy perspective and facts, a lot was said about the population growth and the basic needs of those in future for our future generations. The major energy domains which we see as engineering companies and end users and producers and in the distribution business are transport fuels and power. And as we say, by 2035 or even 2040, we'll need around 50% additional energy So that is a big challenge and a big target to accomplish. One message which you have to take from here is that a lot of studies have been done, and people still agree, with some skeptics, of course, that fossil economy will prevail because it is so deep-grained and vast in terms of the volume and the depth in our day-to-day life usage. More than 90 million barrels per day of crude oil is used for transport fuels, and more than 75% of the global power is still fossil-based, which is still expected to prevail for the coming decades at least. What I bring to you is a different dimension, as I said, in terms of seeing hydrogen as an alternative energy contender in future. It had a lot of momentum a few years back with George Bush making a statement that every child born today will drive a hydrogen car. Somehow it fell through because of the downfall of the economic downturn and the advent of shale gas as a contender. So, but still it is a zero to low carbon energy carrier from different flexible sources. It has a very high source to point of use efficiency compared to any other route, and it is still challenged by the current economics. Infrastructure is a big challenge, and of course the public outreach is one of the major targets to achieve. But if you see based on sheer scale of the fossil fuel, the alternative energy routes will be supplementing rather than substituting the fossil energy. So there I come from is that when you convert hydrocarbon energy into a clean energy, you have to get rid of the carbon, because carbon management is the biggest challenge for the future energy landscape. So what we do when we talk about hydrocarbon, we separate the energy content from the carbon content via, we call it CCUS, which is carbon capture, utilization, and storage. Earlier it used to be CCS. Now the U term has come in which you can utilize that carbon for enhanced oil recovery and some other outlets of energy. So the hydrogen portfolio comes into play with its merits through source flexibility. You have non-renewable and renewable both sources which can give hydrogen. Non-renewable is the fossil, oil, gas, and coal. And then partly in between is the nuclear, which is a very different scenario and which is a different animal. And then the renewable is biomass, hydro, wind, solar. They all can lead to hydrogen generation. So based on the progression of these energy sort of contenders, we will have the future hydrogen energy-based progression in the long term. I'm not talking about next decade, but maybe after 2 decades or 3 decades. We'll have this evolving spectrum of hydrogen-based energy sort of a scenario or a landscape in which we'll have a basic fossil hydrogen, then a nuclear hydrogen, and then renewable and biohydrogen. In meeting these future demands, these pathways will have their own evolving future, and the future will decide how much play they have in the role for satisfying the energy demand. Just 2-3 more slides to give you my perspective and some takeaway messages. The future clean energy outlook is that there was a suggestion that fossil economy will lead to sustainable hydrogen economy, but it's not going to change directly. We have to go through a pathway which is a lower carbon energy pathway, eventually leading to hydrogen economy. So in this transition, we'll have fossil hydrogen with carbon capture, then we will have hydrogen highways, which will then integrate itself into distributed hydrogen through a small-scale electrolytic generation and distribution using clean power from renewables and solar and wind. So there is a transition from fossil hydrogen using hydrocarbon as feedstocks for large-scale production, and then it will go into hydrogen highways, and then it will integrate itself into distributed hydrogen pathways. But for the distributed hydrogen, we'll have low or zero carbon power, coal with CCS, natural gas, low carbon with CCS, nuclear, then renewable and biohydrogen using renewable power, then distributed generation, which is a distributed DG, we call it, using fuel cells, using hydrogen as stationary fuel cells. And then very long distance scenarios have been put forward in terms of every house having a fuel cell with the natural gas available for the hot water. You'll get power and hot water through fuel gas using hydrogen as an onboard generation. So these are very innovative future perspectives in terms of the energy pathways. So this zero carbon power will give two outlets, one to the hydrogen generation and one direct, clean, sustainable power for the rest of the industry. And once you have this hydrogen, then we'll have this transition from initially a hydrogen compressed natural gas mix as a low carbon fuel mix. Then we'll have hydrogen internal combustion engines, direct. And then we'll have hydrogen fuel cell vehicles. And then eventually people are working on as onboard fuel cell, that you'll have a fuel cell on your car or vehicle to generate hydrogen. But the timeline is very unknown, but it will be a long shot. It's not going to be a very short effort. So the timeline is over the next 20 years or 30 years, starting with this transition from fossil all the way to hydrogen economy. And there is still a pretty good belief that it might occur, and our future generations will be the contenders for this sort of energy. So this is the final conclusions, that there will be, in terms of drivers and challenges, there will be low-cost feedstocks, centralized carbon capture, clean power import-export highways in terms of fossil, renewables, and nuclear power, then hydrogen networks, and the enablers will be clean energy mandate and demand growth, carbon taxation and credits, economy of scale. And in future, this is the message you can leave with, that it won't be surprising that in 20 years or 30 years, we have two networks of energy landscape in the world with different level of intensity: hydrogen networks for generation, compression, distribution, dispensing, and CO2 networks for capture, compression, and reinjection. With that, I leave you with your thoughts. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I mean, I have to hand it to him, because mostly I think of 2 years, 5 years, 10 years if I am R&D. And this is a 20, 30-year horizon. So I have to credit you with that, because I'm sure a lot of you have. As I was listening to that presentation, it was, the first two presentations, there were lots of questions that were coming to my mind. And I'm sure a lot of you have questions. There are young volunteers around. I'm not taking questions right now, but we will take questions later. So there are these young boys and girls around. Please write down the questions. I'm sorry that we can't do it live, but we will take questions at the end. It's just to keep the sequence running. But don't forget the questions. I'm sure there are a lot of hydrogen questions. I have a few with fuel cells as well. I've been watching that space for a while. The next person from the panel that I'm going to call up is Sudheer Chand, who is with ABS, and he's the Director of Corporate Offshore Technology in Houston. I wonder what corporate offshore technology is, right? No, I'm kidding. I do understand it's offshore technology at the corporate level. He's a first-class engineer at the UK Board of Trade. He was telling me that he was also involved with Reliance as well, so it's not mentioned on his CV. Perhaps he's trying to hide it, but he was one of the project guys for the large, gigantic oil field or gas field of D6 for Reliance. So I'm honored and delighted to present to you Mr. Sudheer Chand.
Thank you very much. Since you mentioned Reliance, I'll start with that. If those of us who have spent a lot of time in India can recall a village housewife spending a lot of time and effort in getting the evening meal ready. She spends a whole lot of time in gathering either twigs or wood for the fire, or in making cow dung cakes or whatever else the fuel is that she's going to use for preparing the evening meal. The activity itself is very unpleasant, smoky, and not at all a pleasant place to work. This particular Reliance project that we it was just mentioned, brings in gas in such large quantities that most of the cities that most of us are familiar with now have piped gas. The net result is that the gas cylinders are slowly being devolved down to smaller and smaller towns, and eventually they will reach the villages, at which time the village housewife's evening meal task will be a lot better. It will not be that unpleasant task that she's had. It will also release a whole bunch of unnecessary man hours or woman hours that have been spent on tasks such as gathering twigs. Also, the cow dung, which will not be combusted anymore, can be used for improving the farm productivity by being used as manure. So with all those factors put together, I decided that it would be worthwhile for me to spend some time in India and help this project come through. That's the reason why I went back to India and did that. I was looking at the brochure here that was in my hand, and at the bottom of the page there is a curve which shows the curve of the Earth. And above the Earth is a whole bunch of stars and space, and below that curve is the Mother Earth. I see some of you are looking at that brochure. So when we think about our energy future, we have these two areas to look at, either the space or the area below the curve, which is the Earth. From the space right now, there are people here in this building who are quite well conversant with solar energy. So I will not go there at all. Right now, from space, what we are getting is solar energy. So we stay in the curve that's in the area that's below this curve here, which is the Earth. On the Earth, we remember from our high school days that over 70% of the Earth's surface is covered by water. So I'm going to, since I was at one time a sailor, that's the area that I like to concentrate on. The shore-based energy extraction, I will leave to others. Under the water, we know already that the oil and gas discoveries are going further and further away from land in deeper and deeper water, more harsh environment, and it's becoming very technologically challenging to safely extract the oil and gas and bring it to the consumer. That is a great challenge these days, how to do it safely and how to do it in an economically feasible way. Materials sciences are advancing very quickly. New materials are being created, and new composite materials are being brought into service on almost a daily basis. So that part is an area which is quite well known to many people in this room. The other areas that we have to look at are renewable energy from the ocean. My esteemed colleague earlier mentioned hydrothermal energy. Well, that is an area that we have to look at in great detail. It's going to be a source that's going to help us in one other method. We heard that in the speech earlier today from the esteemed gentleman from BG, who said that a lot of our processing machinery is moving from the sea surface to the ocean floor. That's quite true. He also said that the efficiency of this extraction depends completely on the amount of power that's going to be available at the ocean floor, which is also true. He also said that this is actually a problem of power distribution. Yes, that's correct. I'll go one step further and say it is also a problem of power generation. Why do we not put different sciences together here and different enterprises together here and generate power at the sea floor and distribute it at the point of consumption? So that's a future that I look forward to, and I see it coming together in not so distant future. Would you agree with that, madam? Yes. The other area that I think is of increasing importance as far as energy production is concerned is something that's always been a nuisance product to most of us. engaged in the offshore oil and gas production, and that is methane hydrates. Those of us on the production side have always considered hydrates to be a problem to be avoided. Those of us who are on the FPSO or oil extraction side have always been careful of hydrate fields because they are a nuisance and a problem for us, for anchoring of our units and for running our pipelines. However, there's a whole bunch of energy that's locked up in those methane hydrates. According to BOMA, or the former Minerals Management Service website, there's about 50 times more energy locked up there than in all the known reserves of oil and gas in the world. A couple of months ago, we heard that the Japanese have begun extracting this energy as a pilot project in Nankai Trough off of Japan. I believe you'll see a lot more of that as the time goes by. That's a wonderful energy source that we're going to learn to exploit in the future, and it's clean energy. One other area that I think we will also exploit in a big way in the coming years is for resource extraction. Mines on the seafloor are now starting to take off. Diamond mining is ongoing. Gold is being extracted already from under the sea. Nickel mining has started. And what's making it viable is the quality of ores. On land, we are quite happy if we get nickel ores with about 2% of nickel. Subsea, we can get 8 to 10% nickel quite easily, and it's not that difficult to extract it. So we're going to turn to the sea, not just for our energy needs, but also for our material resources and also for our food as time goes by. With those thoughts, I leave it to the next speaker. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Sudheer. So we have widened the horizon even further. I thought back to what Sunil was saying about my being been there, done that. So I've done geothermal as well, by the way. So I did a couple of years of geothermal. But coming back to India, I just wanted to mention that offshore, we just set, this is Transocean, the company that I currently work for. In offshore, the KG Basin area, we set 2 world records for water depth in the last year. 10,400 feet of water depth. This is before you start drilling. So this is technology very, very challenging. Okay, so, and I don't know how far deeper we're going to go, but this is the limit of today what we can do. Beginning of 15 years ago, we were doing 3,000 to 4,000 feet. We are doing 10,000 feet now, and hopefully the reserves go on. And a reference to gas hydrates, since we have the India slant, since I was told to slant India a little bit, huge amount of reserves on gas hydrates in India. There are pilot projects starting in India as well as Japan. So with that, I will introduce the next speaker. Ms. Hege Kverneland is Corporate Vice President and CTO of National Oilwell Varco. She has more than 20 years of extensive engineering and product management experience. She received her MSc in Mechanical Engineering from the Norwegian University of Science and graduated from the General Management program at Harvard Business School as well. I'm honored and delighted.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me here. And it's kind of extraordinary, though. I'm the second Norwegian on this panel, so that's... and we're both girls or ladies.
Otherwise you would be Indian.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm representing National Oilwell Varco, and I will start talking a little bit about what we do, and I will, since I'm sort of late in here now, I will probably repeat some of what's already been said here. But that means that we all agree, so that's a good part. So here's the clicker. Okay, so National Oilwell Varco, we're a worldwide company with 63,000 employees. We're in 66 countries. And this is sort of what we do. We're making drilling systems. So deep water, it's been mentioned several times. I really believe that the energy sources that we will continue working on is coming from deep water. And you mentioned that the record is 10,400 feet. The biggest drill ship that we have built is designed for 12,000 feet now. So the lifting capacity that we have on board on these ships are the biggest ones are for 12,000 feet. It's heavy. The BOP on one of these ships weighs almost 500 tons. So it's a lot of energy that going into these machines just to lift it. What you see here is basically all the equipment that we deliver on ships like this. We don't build the boat. We build the equipment that goes with actually drilling the hole in the ground. So a lot of technology is going into this. This is material technology, it's control systems, it's hydraulics, it's mechanics, it's all kind of technologies that going into here. So we desperately need more engineers in our industry. So I'm pleased to be here and say, hey, come and ask for a job with us, if you want to. I'm always trying to recruit engineers. What we've done, what we've done a lot of in our industry is that we are remotely controlling a lot of the machines. But where we're going is that we're going to get much more data and we're going to automate this process much more. So I mentioned deep water is one area where we will focus or continue producing energy from. But the other one is shale. And shale here in US has been very, very big the last few years. And as you mentioned, the reason why US now is producing so much energy is a lot because of shales. And new technologies within shales is what they call the multi-fracking part, which means that it's more efficient or economically to actually be able to open up the formation so that we can get oil and gas out of the ground. This is a really good thing for NOV since we make equipment, because they have to drill a lot of hole in the ground. They have a walking system, so they move the rig from place to place, 10, 15 meters apart from each other, and they drill another hole. And then we come in with pumping units to open up the fractures. So it's a lot of equipment going into these parts. For us, this has been great. The good thing, I'm 100% sure that shale is not only in US. US is now the big market, but this is all over the world. We need to convince the public that the fracking that's been bad publicity can be done safely without ruining the water level or the groundwater. But if we can prove to the world that we can do this safely, I'm 100% sure that shale will be an important source of energy in the future, and not only here in the US. So how can we do this better? Elisabeth mentioned we will get much more data. What we're doing now, what we've done for years is that the information that we get from the well is via mud pulses. So we send pulses and signals up from the well via mud pulses. What we're doing now is that we're putting smarter systems down into the ground, so we get real-time measurements of what's actually happening in the well while we're drilling it. So we can know what's the weight on bit, what's the torque on the bit, not what we measure on the top on the drill floor, because there's a lot of friction, a lot of losses that we have in that system. So the future is really to I call it put glasses on so that we see what's happening down the hole. And in that way, we can drill much more efficient and safer and faster than what we're doing today. So what you mentioned, that we will do it this 50% faster, I definitely agree with you. We will in the future. So what is the future? A dark hole? No. That's not what I'm trying to say here. Sorry. I do think we have a bright future. But again, we are a little bit behind the rest of the industry, to put it in a nice way. We're a relatively slow industry to adapt to new technologies, but the really way of doing it now is to automate the process much more. And in order to automate it, or when we automate it, we can also reduce some of the people that we have offshore on or the sites, because we can put a lot of smarts into the system. And with all the computer capacity that we have available today, I'm 100% sure that we can do much, much more on the automation side. And I think that is, in the near future, is going to be implemented relatively soon. So by that, thank you.
Thank you, Hege. We couldn't agree more on that one. A couple of observations that, there was a question about shale. And in my opening remarks, I mentioned about how the production has gone up. The amazing thing in the US is the speed. So one is technology. And second is the speed at which this country adopts technology. That's, everybody else in the world, like Hege said, has shale resources. But everybody else in the world is going to spend forever thinking about it. We talk about, I'm sure there are my ex-Schlumberger colleagues here who talk about fracking and chemicals of fracking. 99% of fracking, I would say, comprises of three elements: water, sand, and the third element actually comes from Rajasthan, which is where people are driving, cars these days, which were driving bullock carts, which is guar. And you can't put it in your ice cream anymore. It's going into the fields of Houston, which is a natural product. So 90% of the world is actually fracking with those things. With that, I'm going to introduce the next speaker, Arshad Matin, whom I've known for a long time. I know his bio, but I'm going to read it out a little bit because he has such a wide-ranging bio. He's the president and CEO of Paradigm, and so Paradigm, he will introduce you, is a software company that it does a lot. He's also served as the executive VP for IHS, where he managed all the business lines. He was also president and CEO of BindView, which was acquired by Symantec, so that's exactly why I'm keeping the thread, so the many companies that he's bought and sold, serial entrepreneur. Holds an MBA in finance from the University of Pennsylvania, Wharton, and MSc degree in computer engineering from University of Texas, and a BE from the Regional Engineering College in Bhopal. Welcome, Arshad.
Thank you, Sanjaya, and I'm delighted to be here. I was looking at the audience here, and I don't recall when was the last time I was in the midst of so many IIT graduates. I think the last time was when I attended the McKinsey Partnership Conference in Miami many years ago. As you know, McKinsey has a number of partners who are Indians, and almost every one of them used to be an IIT grad. In fact, when I was being interviewed at McKinsey, they all wondered how come I didn't go to an IIT. And it was kind of an interesting conversation. Anyways, as Sanjay said, I'm CEO of a company called Paradigm. We are the largest independent software company in E&P, oil and gas. The other two are owned by Halliburton and Schlumberger. They're much bigger than us. We are owned by a private equity firm called Apex Partners, who bought us last year for about $1 billion. So I come from the opposite side of where Hege was, heavy equipment and big ships and 500 tons of BOPs and all that fun stuff. We are all about software. Now, software in our space is a very small market. It's a few $1 billion of revenues a year, but it's playing an increasingly important role in what we do and what companies do in E&P. And why is that? Why is software becoming more critical for the success of these E&P projects? There are a number of reasons. The first one is just proliferation of data. Hege talked about real-time data, and that's certainly one of the drivers of more data. But there are other reasons. The density of data that's used is going up. It's not uncommon for these companies to have petabytes of data sitting in their storage systems. Massive amounts of data. You have broadband seismic, you've got multi-component seismic, you've got real-time data, you've got sensors at the drill bit that are pumping data back in real time through broadband connections or fiber in the drill bit. So there's a lot more data to be looked at. The analysis is taking place in context of a shifting dynamics in oil and gas, and we talked about shale. We talked about increasingly risky bets in deep water fields. the easy stuff has been found. Stuff that has to be developed and produced is inherently more complex, which requires more complex analysis that software enables in a way that was not possible a decade ago or even 5 years ago. The third reason why software is becoming more important is the changing demographics. We talk a lot about shale, we talk a lot about new finds off the shore of Brazil. But underneath all of that is a very simple fact that 85% of reserves now are owned by national oil companies. They are the ones who own those reserves. They are the ones who have to figure out a way to produce from those fields. Historically, they depended on the Exxons, the Shells, the BPs of the world as partners to develop these fields. They provided them with the technology and the know-how. And people from Houston and London and other places would actually go as expats and work with the Aramcos and the Petrobras's of the world and help them find hydrocarbons. Well, that's changing now. These national oil companies increasingly rely on their own capabilities, but also on the capabilities of services companies. So that's where the names like Schlumberger and Halliburton and others come up, because they're increasingly partnering with these national oil companies and really helping them develop these assets. Now, what does that mean? It means the people who are looking at data are not the experienced geoscientists who have spent 30 years looking for oil and gas in Houston or other places. These are young kids in Indonesia or India or Brazil who don't have the gray hair, who don't have the experience that their counterparts in the US have had over the decades. So how do we make those geoscientists more productive with more data, solving more complex problems that they face as they develop these more increasingly complex fields? So that's the challenge that we face as an industry, and that's the reason why we believe software is becoming more important and increasingly a critical differentiator for our customers around the world. That's where we are today. When I look ahead, future is not, it's not certainly predictable, but here's our view. Our view is that just like the rest of the industries are embracing the cloud, analytics, mobility, all those big trends are going to migrate to this industry. You will be able to look at very high density seismic data on your iPad. And you'll be able to do that because you're able to now run very massive amounts of data in the cloud using GPU clusters and really have very high quality visualization at your fingertips on an iPad anywhere you are. And the second thing you will see is you will see application of analytics that go beyond the traditional analysis that's being done in this industry. Now, one thing I will criticize ourselves for as an industry is that we haven't been very forward thinking in some ways. We have always relied on traditional ways of looking at data. Well-proven technologies in geology and geophysics and petrophysics have shaped our analysis for too long. There's nothing that stops us as an industry to apply the big data techniques, machine learning, big data analysis that's happening in other industries to our industry. And I think that will happen, as risk-taking as this industry is in terms of their ability to invest billions of dollars in a single project. This industry has not been as willing to take risks in adopting technologies, as Sanjay mentioned. And I think that will influence, and I think that will determine the pace at which these technologies are adopted. But I'm absolutely certain that over the next several years, you will see the convergence of what's happening in the E&P sector, the uniqueness with the demographic shifts, the uniqueness around, asset ownership moving to the national oil companies, and more data. I think all of that will come together with the trends that are taking place in IT, in cloud, in analytics, in mobility, and I think we'll have a next generation software coming out in the next few years, and we certainly plan to participate in that as Paradigm. Okay, with that, thank you very much.
Thank you, Arshad. So I just want to thank all the speakers right now, just before you get the question. But now we'll open it up for questions. Like I said, sorry that we haven't set up for real live questions, but if you can write them on the cards. Young volunteers, can I see the young volunteers around? Yeah. By the way, this is a disclaimer while you would think of your questions. When Arshad says that it's a small market for software, he's talking about geophysical software, which is a very specific domain. For the guys from Microsoft or the other larger entities here, the IT departments of the large oil companies still buy a hell of a lot of mega dollars of software. So I just want to make that point. Don't lose heart in this industry. This industry spends a lot of money on traditional software. The geophysical software is a very special niche, and these guys do a phenomenal job, by the way. I'm going to try and do this as democratically as possible. I'll read a question, and if one of the panelists volunteers, that would be great. If you don't, then I think we will. Yeah, let me just look through. Oh, there's some tough ones here. One second. Give me half a second. Let me just. One of the biggest dangers of having H2 on board is the combustibility. One can't contain an H2 fire. How do you think H2 can be made safe for transportation? We know who this is going to.
Well, that's a good maiden question to start with. Actually, there have been some, if you go on internet and go on YouTube, there are a few films which are made when you can compare if you put a fire on a conventional gasoline engine versus a hydrogen engine. And you'll be amazed that a gasoline engine fire totally devastates the car, and the hydrogen is just a flame coming out at the top, with the car is still intact. So that's the great thing about hydrogen, that it is, although invisible flame, it is just very localized and very high velocity flame, which doesn't spread, so it just goes up, because it's very light, and it has a very high flame velocity. So having said that, there have been a lot of studies. Of course, as I said, the biggest challenge for hydrogen networks and infrastructure is the public outreach, apart from the technological advances and the systems around that to contain it. So it is not, it has been going on for 10 years, and as you must have seen, there are already 58 hydrogen distribution centers or dispensing stations in California, which are using more than 5,000 hydrogen fuel cell based vehicles. And in Europe, I think there are at least 7 or 8 transit companies who are constantly using their fleet on hydrogen fuel cells. So the initial part of this there will be a learning curve, and it will be gained through the fleet system. No personal, personal vehicles will take a long time because of the confidence of the people or the drivers. So the fleets are taking the first pass on this. There are Shell, BP, Exxon, all the majors have bought into this concept, although it directly competes with oil. But they are the people who look into future and a carbon-free energy. And they are the people who are driving these programs in Europe and in US and in Asia. I was at one of the World Hydrogen Conference 4 years back in New Delhi, and there was a high ministry level inaugural and all that. And it was I was amazed how much focus and how much impetus is there in India to go the hydrogen way. I was surprised myself. It has taken a little bit of a toll because of the economic downturn and some of the shale gas competition. But eventually, nothing is going to replace an energy source. Everything will fill the puzzles in that main frame. As you say, 50% of the additional energy has to come in next 30 years. So every little will come and fill these gaps. So don't take that something will replace. So everything will find its place, biofuels, nuclear, hydrogen, renewable energy, hydrogen energy. So as I said, hydrogen in the beginning will be from fossil sources as it is produced today with natural gas and other hydrocarbons. And then coal will find a way through clean energy through IGCCs, which is basically burning hydrogen as a post-combustion capture technology. Pre-combustion technology for capture. Post-combustion will be more difficult. So all the coal-fired stations will be replaced by IGCC, which is burning hydrogen syngas. And in long term, it will be natural gas combined cycle and then natural gas combined hydrogen engines and then. So that's how the progression will take place, and every step will have a very, very intense safety assessment and a public outreach, and there will be so many institutions which will play their role. So I'm sure we'll get there.
All right. Thanks, Sanjiv. The next question, I think this again, it's the reference to shale gas and fracking have been numerous. One major product of fracking is waste and produced water fuel. Elizabeth mentioned mobile water treatment. What advantages are you seeing in innovation in water treatment, especially mobile water treatment?
Did you say what other?
What advances? What is the new technologies? What are the advances? I read it wrong, sorry.
There is several advances in water treatment. I think one of the things we see on the mobile water treatment plants is the ability to follow the fracking. As we know, it's a sort of a mobile industry. It's not one place for years and years. So the ability to move mobile water treatment plants around and treat high amounts of high amounts of pollutions in the water and efficiently clean the water. That reduces trucks on the road because that's one of the main elements today, and it of course reduces the dependency of water and the infrastructure overall. Also see that, all kinds of energy production is really dependent on water, and clean water is a main energy sort of outcome of energy production as well. We need clean water around the world. We need to efficiently treat and clean water from many processes as well as for direct water consumption. So all advances in water treatment, both near term for this mobile treatment and in larger scale, will have a close interaction with our energy consumption and production.
Thank you. Thanks.
Can I comment also?
Yeah, sure. Please.
And I absolutely agree with Elisabeth here, because what I've been told is that on some of these these fields where they do the fracking, it's up to 1,200 truckloads that's going back and forth, and most of them are with water. And I would be really upset if I was a neighbor to that road that suddenly got all those trucks going back and forth. So for the shales to be successful, not only in the US, we need to fix that issue. We will not be allowed to have that many truckloads going back and forth other places in the world.
Very, very good point, Hege. It's almost a trucking business.
Yes.
Well, the next question I think is for you. What are the drivers for automation to be widely adopted globally? Should be an easy one.
Well, as long as I've been in the business and I attended this industry seminars like SPE and IEDC, I've heard about this terrible crew change when all these old guys are retiring and these new guys are coming in and they don't know anything. I think that is going to be one of the drivers, because we are getting new crew in, and I'm excited. And they are used to using Nintendo. I call it the Nintendo generation. They're used to doing this. They grew up with this. They're used to seeing what's happening on a video screen, and they rely on that, or they trust that much more than what we with gray hair have. So honestly, I think we're ready now. In '94, I always pick on that. I'm from Norway. We remotely operated a rig 10 kilometers away from where we actually had all the machines. And this was an exhibition area outside or in Stavanger. And 94, that's next year, that's 20 years ago. So that's almost how long time this industry takes to adopt new technology. So I'm really hopeful now that we will get there.
Yeah. And now we're not talking about the future, we're saying we should have done it a while.
Yeah, we'll do it next year.
Yeah. So I think my 20-year frame is okay in your, yeah. So, yeah.
There was this, I don't know, there was, if you guys have seen this, there was this McKinsey slide, and Arshad might have produced it when he was at McKinsey, which showed that, airline industry took 15 years, and this is about 10 years ago. We used to take 30 years as an industry to deploy technology, and that was embarrassing, and I think it's gotten better. But let me ask, this is a question specifically to Arshad. What are your comments on industrial internet being talked by GE in oil and gas context?
I think it is going to happen. I think the way we think about oil and gas today it's not unlike other industries where there are three I's, right? There's more instrumentation, right? So everything is getting more instrumented, whether it's while you're drilling, while you're producing. So there's just more data being collected. The second I is the interconnectedness, right? So things are now more connected to each other. And the third I is the intelligence, right? They're more intelligent. And I think, people use different buzzwords. From an oil and gas perspective, I think it will happen here in the US, as you pointed out. It always tends to be where things begin to start. Like what happened in unconventional, I think a lot of the innovation will take place in smaller companies because they're more willing to adopt new things. And I think the embrace of the cloud technologies and mobility would actually accelerate the adoption of those things. The final thing I'll say is that it's not just because you have these new technologies that are available. I think it's also going to happen because the workflows are changing. Right? It used to be, those of you who were in oil and gas 20 years ago, most E&P shops were organized by function. You had a geophysical group, and there was a geological group, and an engineering group, and they didn't talk to each other. Now, teams are organized not by function, they're organized by assets. Right? So each asset team has all the multidisciplinary, and to be able to do all that stuff, you need the software and the connectedness. So I think it's going to happen. It's just hard to tell. The unknown really is the pace of adoption.
Right.
As we've talked more than once, that this industry is kind of risk averse of adopting new things.
No, good answer, good answer. All right, let me try another one here. I think this is related to, how could you please elaborate on how quickly we can see extraction of nickel from subsea at 8% ore concentration? I think, Sudheer, this is the quote. I'm not even going to try to do it. Pass it to somebody else.
Well, it's going on now. There's 2 sites in the world that I'm aware of where extraction of nickel is ongoing. One is South Indian Ocean, and that's in very minor quantities. And the other is in Papua New Guinea, and that's going to be in much larger quantities. The third area that's going to come up is Cook Islands, also in the Pacific. So the demand is growing for nickel, and the other area where the demand is growing quite a lot is in what we know as rare earth minerals or metals. 90% of those come out of China. China has said that they will restrict exports because they need it for their domestic consumption. We need about 350 kilograms of that stuff in each air turbine or wind turbine that we put up. So there's a push for more renewable energy, and so that's accelerating the demand or making the demand worse for this.
Thank you. So there are a number of questions on shale gas here, or shale gas, shale oil. So I'm going to try and synthesize them into a few questions. First question is, is the fracking boom overhyped? So it's obviously, I think it goes to the question is how much is the ballpark, where do we see the increase in shale production in the US? Second one is outside of the US, where else in the world are potential shale gas areas? So those are the two main questions. First one is how much is the upside on shale gas production in the US? And second, anybody want to take it?
Yeah, I can take a cut at it. Sort of there are two open questions around shale. One is, the production cost right now is about $60 to $70 a barrel, right? So WTI is trading at 90. I don't know where it's today, but in the low 90s. And to the extent oil prices stay in that area, you would have economical returns on shale, and people will continue to invest and drill. On the other hand, if with the deal with Iran and production coming back in Libya, where it's down to 200,000 barrels now, right, post-revolution, if geopolitical factors calm and prices, the geopolitical premium that exists in oil prices, that goes down, I think there would be a big question as to what extent. The second question around is a lot of the production increases have happened because of Bakken in North Dakota and in Texas. And we have been able to add $1 million barrels of production in Bakken. There is expectation that there is similar prospects in California and Ohio and so on. And the question is, are these new areas going to be as productive as Bakken or not? Right? I think those are two things to watch when it comes to shale in the U.S. And I don't think anybody knows. I
think you're right. I think that, there's shale oil and there's shale gas. They're two distinct ones.
Yeah.
Shale gas has very different producing, depending on the reservoir. So you produce it at 2, you produce it at 3, you produce it at 4, and depending on where the U.S. gas needs is, the marginal fields come on or off. In oil, right now there's a delta. Right now there's a substantial delta. So prices of oil have to really drop before shale production.
Yeah. And $60 to $70 is the floor. The one thing I'll just add on shale is I was actually at a breakfast with some folks, big oilfield services CEOs, and they made an interesting point about shale, which surprised me. They said most of the issues that they face today, they and their customers face today, have to do with above the ground challenges, right? Yeah. So it's the water. We talked about water. We talked about, one of them told me is that the highest ROI project they have for their company is to build housing in North Dakota, right? The fastest payback is to build housing in North Dakota. So I think the industry is still, we talk a lot about environment and environmental concerns and so on, but I think there are some real logistical and above the ground issues that are still open in the US. And when you think outside the US, it's not just technology adoption, it's just lack of regulatory framework and lack of private capital to back investments in Europe and other parts of the world. That's going to slow down the growth of shale outside the US.
So if I was to, since I live overseas right now, on shale, there is a lot of promise, and I don't know the numbers top of my head. I should. In many countries, and there's lots of talk in many countries as well. In India, there is talk. Even Saudi, there is talk about shale.
Quite a bit.
So there is extensive talk, but there are two, three items that really make shale difficult to do. One is, for example, in India, it's populated land. Already, land acquisition in India for anything is a real pain in the neck. Now, you complicate it by the fact that you are going to want to drill every 100 yards. Right? It's not going to happen. Second one is in the US, with the mechanism of legality that the guy owning the land, whether he has mineral rights or not, always makes money. So there's this nice nexus between the person who's on top and the person who's drilling below. Everybody makes money, everybody's happy, everybody keeps their gup shut. Okay. In most of the world, in all of the world, outside the US, that is not there. The oil is extracted by people, and the people living above don't get a dime. Okay, this is just the way the world is set up. And so it's set up like that in India and Assam. It's set up like that in Nigeria. So the link between the benefit to the person who owns the land is missing. Okay. And that in shale is hugely important, because you need land, you need access rights, you need, at least in today's technology, you need trucks going back and forth. So that is the bigger challenge than anything else, which is why above ground challenges.
Sure.
So,
well, I was just trying to add where are the other major reserves which have been sort of predicted or explored over the world. So I think the second biggest, in fact, more than US, is China. And then we have some parts of Eastern Europe, around Poland and in Australia, and few places all over the world, small reserves. But what I read is the biggest challenge for China to catch up on this shale gas phenomena was, apart from the fact that the technology has to come from US, I guess, because we are the only one, or US is the only one which has expertise in this so far. I heard that the biggest challenge in China is still the water resources. China is really short of water resources compared to other countries. Even the coal utilization in China is challenged by water. So you can think about the shale phenomena there. So apart from the public acceptance and the rights and the legalities, I think that will play a major role. But there is a big synergy between gas and oil if you talk about shale. When you talk about multi-fracking, I think the parity of gas price versus oil price is narrowed, because you get both of them, oil and gas, so the parity will stay. But the best thing about oil, which is very bad for my business, is that the shale oil is very sweet and paraffinic. So it doesn't need much hydrogen, which is not good for our business.
Everybody has an angle.
But there is a big synergy in terms of oil and gas, and I think US is driven, as we said, that they went very fast, not because to bridge the gap of demand, but I think the major driver for US was energy independence. That drove all the legalities out. Otherwise, US is known to take much longer than Europe in terms of policy making. Even to use CNG took 20 years, where in India it took 2 months, I think. Overnight, the Supreme Court gave a verdict, and everybody started working on CNG engines. But in US, it took more than 10 years of debates. But I think that's the dynamics of this energy landscape, that where you focus, things go around it.
Yeah, no, good point. All right, so something completely different, training. We are hiring a lot of young engineers while people with experience are retiring. How do we train all these new people? How do we attract the best and brightest to our industry? Anybody want to take it? It's a tough one. Huh?
I think one thing I'll tell you is that when you talk to young people today versus even 10 years ago, 5 years ago, I think this is a more attractive industry for a lot of youngsters. There is this young woman we happen to know through some family connection who is working for Exxon. And she's a recent grad, and the way Exxon recruited her and is training her, right? And she's a mechanical engineer being trained on reservoir engineering, right? And she is telling her friends, right, that you want to get a nice paying job with a nice company, you've got to be an engineer and go look at oil and gas. So I think there is that shift taking place, that this is not as unattractive a business as it was 10 years ago, right? Part of it is the downturn, there's just jobs are there. But training from our little geophysical or geotechnical side, it's a big challenge, and we are trying to solve that through making our software easier to use. A point was made about they all grew up on Nintendos, and our view is that software that looks more like a consumer product or a gaming product is more likely to be successful in the future versus some very scientific-looking, complicated product. So part of that will happen through that. Part of that will just happen from supply and demand. I think as fewer jobs are available and outside, more and more people will come to this industry and move to Houston and places like Houston.
So I'm going to ask Elisabeth or Hege for a Norwegian view, maybe.
Yep. Well, you know, in Norway, it's oil and gas is the coolest industry to work in, and it has been for years.
In Houston too, by the way.
Yeah, and the main reason is that that's where we make most money, of course. So that's definitely a driver. But oil and gas industry, as long as I've been around, has been sort of the coolest place to be in Norway. And but of course, the young ones growing up now, we all want to be more environmental friendly, and so the challenge there is that some young ones look at it like that it's not environmental friendly. I would strongly argue against that, of course, but I would also mention that we all in the industry do a lot to get young talent into our companies. We have technical colleges all over the world where we train people, we get people into the industry, we train them on everything from mechanics to hydraulics to instrumentation, to get them into the industry and get them to not only take them from the high school, but also get to know what we are doing and how we do stuff. So I think we're doing a relatively good job. In Norway, as I mentioned, and you can comment on that afterwards, but in Norway we've been very, very lucky because it's actually the coolest industries to work in.
I think I'd like to add something. I think we'll see a demographic shift also in our industries, and we are seeing that. 30 years back, this industry was dominated by men from Norway and from Houston and a few other places. Today we recruit to this industry women, more women than just Hege and me, who started some years back. and we do recruit from a lot of other places in the world. So while Texas A&M might not have a significant growth in terms of graduates over those years, the attraction to the industries comes from a much wider population than what it has done traditionally. So I think when we talk about sort of the lack of people, it's not quite real. And I also think that being somewhat resource-strained forces us to actually use the innovative power that we have. It forces us to go for automation, it forces us to use software, it forces some of us to actually train people and spread the knowledge we have more effectively. So I think it's healthy to be somewhat resource constrained, and I think we're somewhat over-dramatizing the problem.
Thank you. I'm going to do one last question, which is actually for Sudheer. This is going back to your, since we mentioned D6, you're going to get into trouble with it. It is interesting that you mentioned you were involved with D6 gas field development. Is it true that the production has significantly dropped and India has to import LNG at a high price of $14 to $70?
Yes, I do know from reading in the news reports that the production has dropped. At the time when I left Reliance, we were at pretty close to the peak production. So whatever I know now is only from published reports.
So is there a correlation there, or?
I hope not.
You should go back.
Yes.
Okay, look, I think we are running out of time, so I'm going to, firstly, does every one of you just want to end with a few words? I mean, can we start with Elisabeth, a sentence or two, whatever you want to say?
I think what I'd like to say as concluding remarks is I think we have a fantastic and very fascinating energy future ahead of us. I think it will be more diverse, both in terms of us who are working in the industry, and I think it will be more diverse in terms of energy sources. I think we will be surprised by the speed of innovation in some areas, and I think we'll be frustrated by the lack of speed in some areas. I think we'll have new actors and new companies and new types of companies joining these industries, and I think we'll have lots of fascinating years ahead of us.
Thank you.
Well, we have had lots of discussion about shale gas, and as it happens, Reliance is also in shale gas. But I've also heard a lot of debate in many parts of the world about the use of water for shale gas extraction. My worthy colleague on the right said that in China, there is a shortage of water. Yes, there is. In the areas where they believe shale gas exists are the same areas where agriculture is crying out for water. Sure. So the debate is on whether to use that water for extracting more gas or for producing more food. And that will continue for a while.
Sanjiv?
Yeah, I just want to end up with a note that I think we are up against a very, very bright future for oil and gas and energy sector in general. So we had this rather black period for oil and gas from 95 to 2005, I guess, those 10 years, and that's why we are missing that talent pool with 15 years experience, because everybody rushed to IT and computers and banking those days because the petroleum industry was very subdued with $10 a barrel for 10 years. So we have a great future, very diversified energy landscape, not just oil and gas, renewables, and nuclear, with all the allied industry coming with it, with all sorts of software, all the instrumentation, all the automation. Everything comes together. Like, as I said, Technip is doing also 11,000 feet deep sea pipeline in Mexico, Gulf of Mexico, which is the deepest. So the experience is building up, everybody is excited, and it's a great domain to be, and very highly rewarding, I must say.
Thank you.
The pace of innovation will pick up from a technology point of view, not just in software, but all the other dimensions we talked about. And the second thing we didn't talk about, but I think everybody needs to understand, is that this revolution in shale that's taking place in the US, both in gas and oil, is not only making the US more independent from an energy point of view, but also driving a manufacturing revolution. I think that input cost of energy have come down, and it is putting American manufacturing on very firm footing moving forward. So watch that. As manufacturing revives in the US, a lot of that will have happened because of the revolution in shale.
Excellent point, Arshad.
And my comment is that, well, I'm very optimistic about oil and gas future. I'm convinced that I will retire in this industry. We need to do things smarter than what we've done now. We mentioned the depth of 12,000 feet of water. That means that everything gets much bigger. And in order to continue drilling on deeper and deeper water, for example, we need to do everything much smarter. Everything from manufacturing, from material technology, from automation, from monitoring the equipment, so we don't have to have all these guys and girls offshore or on the dangerous areas of the place. So if I can have one word, we need to be much smarter. And that means a lot of innovation. So we will be busy doing that as well.
Excellent note to end on. I just want to thank the members of the panel. I think we've had a great discussion. I want to thank the audience for being your questions. I'm sorry that we didn't get to all the questions. There were so many, but they're such wonderful questions. So thank you for being a great audience. And I think we have some mementos for the panelists. So if you just bear with me, we will do the next.
So first of all, I agree with you, Hege, that future is not a black hole, it's a bright future.
Yes.
It's time to thank all the panelists, but first the KBR for sponsoring this session. And so a round of applause for KBR. And a round of applause for the panelists. I'm going to give mementos to each one of them. Thank you.
Thank you. Good job. Thanks so much.